You're listening to Reimagine America on 860 AM. The Answer. Once again, your host, Joyce Cordi.
And we're back with Jim Rex, the energy that is behind the new Alliance Party. And as we went to break, Jim and I were just starting to talk about how the divisions we're experiencing weaken us. And I think you're absolutely right that if you look at the Democratic primary as it's beginning to shape up, it has two marked characteristics. How much can we give you for free? And, you know, you and I are both old enough to know there is no such thing as free. And it's also about how do we divide you up by gender, by race, by whatever. I mean, America's strength has always been in being a melting pot. You know, Charlie Cook of the National Review, who is English, right, who's a naturalized American, says nobody comes to America wanting to be not wanting to be American. So what's happened to us, and how do we, you know, what those divisions, in my view, are not just national security issues, but they weaken us economically and socially. And where do we go from here? Because I don't think the majority of Americans want that.
No, they don't. I don't. I know you don't, and I'll bet most of your listeners don't. We have sort of an inherent understanding that when you deal with big, urgent, complicated problems, you need to work together. You need to find common ground, find consensus, and, you know, be pragmatic problem solvers, which is not what we see any longer. We're no longer a melting pot, as you said. We're now more like an octagon, if you're familiar with the fighting cages you see on television.
Yep.
And, you know, the parties are responsible for that. They're responsible for it because of the way they run for office and the way they keep their incumbents in office and the way they hang on to power. And, you know, division works well for them, and it does not work well for the country. I think Americans are ready for another choice, another approach to politics on the ballot, a different type of candidate. The Alliance Party, you know, there's no magic about, or it was not an accident that we chose that name, the Alliance Party. You know, embedded in that name is the first three letters, all. We're all in this together. And even the synonym ally, that we have to stop viewing ourselves as adversaries. We need to start viewing ourselves as allies who should be working together toward the perfection of this great idea called America. And it won't happen unless we do that. It won't happen unless we have leaders that do that. And I know you've mentioned President Trump a couple of times. You know, I started this journey after being in office for 4 years as a constitutional officer elected in South Carolina. And from inside the sausage factory, I saw how bad it really is. And it's gotten worse. I was elected back in 2006, and I was a constitutional officer, Secretary of Education, for 4 years, 2007 to 2011. And I saw the career politicians in both parties worship the god of reelection. It was the top priority. Everything else was a distant second. And that makes sense because by definition, you cannot be a career politician unless you do what?
Get reelected.
Right? Mm-hmm. That's right. So that's the top priority. So we need to think about the way this thing all started, you know, with the founding fathers. They didn't envision career politicians that stay in there for 30 years. They envisioned, as you well know, Joyce, because I've heard you talk about it, they envisioned citizen legislators, people who came in for a term or two or three, made a difference, tried to make things better in their community or their state or their nation, and then went back home. You know, Thomas Jefferson went back to his farm.
They saw...
These people never go back home.
Yeah, the Founding Fathers saw service as an obligation, not a vocation. There's nothing in the United States Constitution that requires two parties. As a matter of fact, if you read the Federalist Papers or you read George Washington's farewell address, the last thing they wanted this country to have was a system dependent on two major parties.
You're right. In George Washington's last public statement, he warned about political parties. And he predicted that if we had them, they would become more concerned about their own desires and needs than the desires and needs of the nation.
You're
And
absolutely.
I remind people that George Washington never told a lie.
And George Washington was prophetic.
He sure was.
As you and I both know, because we've both studied American history. So, and a very good example of what you are talking about the first priority of all politicians to get reelected. And we had a conversation off the air before we started about a couple of current members of the Republican Party and their sometimes, people that I've known, and one of them that Jim knows for many years. And sometimes it's hard to recognize their public personas in conforming. And so sometimes I think our elected politicians, and this is one of the reasons that I think the Alliance Party is so important, is that right now so much of our politics is driven by the thing that Thomas Jefferson most feared, what he called the mob. Jacksonian democracy, which, by the way, is what my undergraduate degree is in, is the rabble choosing the representative was their fear. That was why they wanted the House to have 2-year terms and the Senate to have 6-year terms, so that the Senate could act as a brake on the House, but the people would have direct representation. That's the basis of the republic rather than a direct democracy. But what I see in politicians today is they fail to lead. The dependency on getting reelected, they fail to lead. They don't tell people to aspire to be their better selves. They say, okay, we'll conform to your anger.
Anger works, unfortunately, just like, negative campaigning works, unfortunately, because it appeals to the, as you said, not our better side, but our least desirable side. And we've got to find leaders who do that. I'm a firm believer in term limits, and the Alliance Party is also. So one of the many things that's different about the approach that we're talking about with the new Alliance Party is that we are looking for candidates who are driven and motivated by public service, not by wanting to have a long career as an elected official. And that makes a big difference, because you suddenly have people that are willing to risk re-election in order to do the right thing. In other words, if you go in knowing you're not going to make a career out of it, and you have to take a stand on something that matters, a matter of principle, that's the right thing for the majority of people in the country, and you realize it may not be popular with a particular base or a demographic, it may not even allow you to be reelected, you're willing to do that because you're not giving up a career that you don't aspire to anyway.
Right. In other words, you are not running for office in order to pay your mortgage. And I want you to hold that thought, because we're going to go take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of how the Alliance Party is going from being an idea to a thing.